and do the record. Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to our Mental Health Mondays, as done by the Ohio Council of Churches. Glad that you are sharing with us today. We are dealing today with clergy and their mental health needs, how they minister to people, but at the same time are in need of services themselves. Our guest presenter today will be Brenda. Look at your name again, Brenda Sanford.
Correct.
But I'm going to let Dr. Sullivan do the introduction of her. I'm going to open us up with a word of prayer, and then I will turn it over to our executive director, Dr. Jack Sullivan Jr., who will present our speaker for today. Let us pray. We gather in your presence today, O God, once more and again, addressing a subject that is near and dear to us. We thank you for the state of Ohio, who has given us this grant that we might be able to provide these services. We thank you for our presenter today. Pour into her as she presents to us. Thank you for those who have tuned in, who will listen, who will learn, and who will inquire. Bless this, our sacred time together. We pray in your name. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Dr. Sullivan.
Amen. Thank you, Dr.
Present
McIntosh.
our speaker.
Yes, thank you, Dr. McIntosh, and hello, everyone, once more. Welcome to our Mental Health Monday Zoom. We are delighted to offer these Zooms on every second Monday in partnership, as you heard from Dr. McIntosh, with the state of Ohio. The Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services awarded several agencies in Ohio with allocations with the expectation that those bodies would carry out work, we call ministries here with the council, that address the reduction of the stigma that is often linked to mental health care and treatment. And so we've offered a series of Zoom forums on the subject matter pertaining to mental health care and treatment, a variety of segments of our population. And today we're dealing with the segment that is near and dear to me and Dr. McIntosh and other clergy, because today we're talking about clergy and our own mental health issues and needs. Many of us do quite well directing congregants and laypersons and colleagues for mental health care and treatment when we think they need it or could benefit from it. But sometimes we don't subscribe to that treatment ourselves. And so here with us today is Reverend Brenda Sanford, who is a clergywoman herself, and I met her at a Disciples of Christ clergy retreat some years ago. She is a counselor, and she's going to talk with us about issues of clergy as they relate to mental health care and treatment. She is a full-time counselor and director of the Center Light the Way Christian Counseling in Bellefontaine, Ohio. She's a native of Logan County. She received her undergraduate degrees through Miami University and her Master of Social Work degree from The Ohio State University. She and her husband, Jim, have 2 married adult daughters, 3 young granddaughters, and a young grandson. She's an active member of the First Christian Church, Bellefontaine. Brenda is also a licensed lay minister in Ohio for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, as I mentioned earlier. And she led the Cafe Grace Praise and Worship service for First Christian Church, Bellefontaine. She's trained in EMDR and in trauma therapy. So I'm happy to present my colleague in ministry, my fellow Disciples of Christ minister, Brenda Sanford. Thank you, Brenda, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jack, for inviting me. It's exciting to be able to talk with you all today. I have been a social worker in Logan County for 42 years and have been doing therapy for a little over 20. And my primary heart is for those who help others, because I feel like if you can help one person who helps others, then it's like throwing a pebble into the water and you can get the ripple effect. So I really love being able to talk to pastors who are ministering to others, because we do have a strong impact in people's lives. And that is critical, that we're maintaining our own mental health. I have a kind of a little agenda that I want to go through. I'm going to screen share that so you can kind of see. I'm a visual person. So let me just here we go. Get that up. Everybody see that okay? So I want to talk about, in general, the mental disorders that any of us can be afflicted with, just to continue to give you a better understanding of what's out there and how to think about it, how to look at it. But also, I will really try to spend more time talking about those that are more likely to impact us as caregivers to our congregants, and those things that we sometimes overlook and minimize and think just really aren't that important. Oftentimes, we don't do our own self-care like we should. So I categorize them in ways that make the most sense to me. They're not necessarily the way they're categorized in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, but the way they make the most sense to me. So I hope they make sense to you. I started out with mood disorders, and the very first one is grief. It is obvious that when we have a loss of some sort, we are going to have a grief process that we go through. And grief is considered short-term. In the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, it says really the grief process should be dissipating in about 6 months. So anything that lasts longer than 6 months actually goes into a diagnosis of depression. And depression is from one extreme to the other. You know, we can have a mild depression. There used to be a diagnosis called dysthymia. It was taken out of the DSM recently, but dysthymia is like a low-level depression that we carry for years. Then, of course, we can have major depression that is very impactful. It can be in the short term or the long term. So characteristics of depression for you to be aware of: low energy, loss of interest in things that you have enjoyed doing in the past, feelings of failure, feelings of, I think I should be punished. I feel like I'm being punished. A change in appetite, either really don't have an appetite for things, or I want to eat everything in the house. Change in sleep habits, from I can't sleep at all, or maybe I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and can't get back to sleep, to I want to sleep all the time. I can't hardly get myself out of bed. Depression is biological. It is in our central nervous system. It is generally a lower level of serotonin in our body. They also have come to believe that there's actually a structural change that happens in the brain with depression, where the nerve endings that send out the chemicals into the synapse actually pull apart somewhat, so that the serotonin that does get released by the dendrites in this nerve cell don't get picked up and registered in this nerve cell. So there can be a structural change, which is why medication is helpful, but it's not really the only thing that's helpful. I really wish that every physician who gave medication for depression also referred their patient to counseling, because very often depression is a carryover of grief, or it is also a side effect of a trauma that someone's been through. We'll talk a lot more about trauma here in a little bit, because it is way bigger, I think, than most people realize. And it's one of the things that I look at probably in the first session, even I start to look at trauma. Then another mood disorder is bipolar disorder. bipolar disorder is when someone has had at least one clinical experience of depression and at least one clinical experience of mania. So mania is the flip side of depression. It is excessive energy. It could be euphoric energy, but it could also be agitated energy. There are two types of bipolar disorder. One is bipolar 1, which is the mania is pretty bizarre. When you experience bipolar 1 mania, or when you know someone or have met someone with bipolar 1 mania, you know something's going on. It's very excessive, very fast talking, could have some thought disorders, some psychosis that goes with it, but also usually excessive energy in agitation or excessive energy in doing something bizarre, like, you barely can make your house payment, but you're going to start a business. You're going to start this $1 million business and it's going to be successful, and you just know it is. But a lot of people struggle with bipolar 2 and don't realize it. An example is one woman that I actually saw for a couple of years before I actually got the right diagnosis for her. She had a lot of depression. We knew that. But when she wasn't feeling depressed, she was fairly high energy, very friendly, very gregarious, but not excessively so, not to the point where I was concerned about her having bipolar, until one day she had left her husband, and one day she came into my office and told me that she was a little concerned because she was talking to 20 different men at the same time online. And that was the red flag that made me go, okay, that's not normal. That's not usual. Let's talk about bipolar disorder. And even though I'd seen her for a couple of years, she never acknowledged to me that she had had a bipolar diagnosis from another practitioner in the past, but she didn't want to have a bipolar diagnosis. So it was easy to discredit that diagnosis in her mind, and she had a hard time acknowledging. But once we were able to realize that's what it was, then she could get on the right medication. Depression medication is an antidepressant. There are a number of really healthy, safe medications for depression. They are low risk for the most part, and are non-addicting for the most part. Bipolar disorder needs a mood stabilizer, perhaps in addition to a antidepressant, but definitely a mood stabilizer, because otherwise there are these peaks and valleys of the mania, then the crash into depression. And unfortunately, depression and bipolar disorder is often even deeper than the average person experiences depression if they only have a diagnosis of depression. So if you ever feel this, excessively high and low mood shifts, be curious, get some help with that, have a practitioner who helps you figure out if that could possibly be. This woman was in her 50s and had really never been treated effectively for bipolar 2 disorder. Then we move into anxiety disorders. Now, most of us have anxiety at some point in time. Generalized anxiety, though, is not necessarily connected to an event or a situation. Generalized anxiety is a feeling of anxiousness most of the time. And certainly you might, we all have stress in our life all the time. So you might pin it to those stresses, but the feeling of anxiety is more prominent than the average person would feel based on that stress level. It also could be connected to a trauma history or a history of, say, for example, being raised in a family where someone was an alcoholic. And why I say that is because that if your body has to be trained to always be concerned about, is the house safe? Let's say dad was an alcoholic. Is dad safe today? Is he drinking today? Is he enraged today? Is he passed out on the couch today? Your body gets trained to always be hyper vigilant about, is the environment safe? And what am I going to have to face today? And it can actually change the structure of the brain. The amygdala is I call it the alarm bell of the brain. It's the part of the brain that triggers the fight, flight, or freeze part of our body. And so if you have been raised in a unsafe environment, your amygdala is probably bigger than the average person. And you may feel a lot more anxiety. Anxiety might get triggered a lot easier for you. And you might walk around more anxious than the average person does. Then there are panic disorders. So what I generally talk to people about is, what is the range of your anxiety? 0 to 10. So I had a woman today who actually has PTSD. So PTSD has a lot of anxiety attached to it as well. And she had gotten to a pretty good place where life felt pretty safe, but some memories are coming back. And so her anxiety right now is generally at a 6 on a 10-point scale. But in the past, when she'd have some memories come back, she was up to a 9, 8 or a 9. I call a panic attack a 10. That's when your body is hugely reacting to the anxiety. You usually have rapid heartbeat. You may have sweaty palms. Your thoughts are racing. You may have some distress in your throat, neck, and chest. Lots of people have gone to the ER thinking they're having a heart attack with the panic attack. And it can be a pretty scary situation. Once you've had a panic attack, it's very easy then to be anxious about having another panic attack. So your anxiety, your generalized anxiety can raise because now I'm afraid I'm going to have a panic attack in Walmart. What if I have a panic attack while I'm preaching? What if I have a panic attack when I'm visiting a congregant in the hospital? And then you begin to fear the fear, if that makes sense. So panic disorder is definitely something that will probably need medical intervention. And generalized anxiety would really benefit from medical intervention, whether it be an antidepressant, which can kind of calm the system down. That is usually the first line of treatment for generalized anxiety. An increase in serotonin helps usually calm the body a bit. Certainly, if there is intense anxiety, there are other medications that are anti-anxiety medications. They begin to get a little more risky because some of them can be addicting, like Xanax, for example. It can become addicting. We can also have a phobia, which is intense anxiety for a specific situation. So maybe you have a phobia of public speaking. Now, that's probably not the case for pastors, but if you would, then you have a medication you take just right before you preach or before you have to speak publicly that just helps calm your body down so it doesn't feel so fearful and you can handle that. Or maybe you have a fear of heights and you're going to be going to a vacation where you have to cross a bridge, Mackinac Bridge, for example, if you're going up to Michigan, and you might have something that just helps you, with that anxiety of crossing that bridge or something, that's very fearful for you. Anxiety disorders can be very limiting to us. Lots and lots of us live with anxiety disorders, not thinking that we should get them treated, but they limit our ability to live life. They limit our ability to feel that peace and that joy that I know God and Jesus want us to have and be able to live in most of the time. So I would really encourage you, if any of you have excessive anxiety where you battle it on a regular basis, I would encourage you to consider getting some help for that, whether it be through a medication or seeing a therapist to figure out what the cause is. Thought disorders. Now, I did put obsessive compulsive disorder under thought disorders. It usually is considered more of an anxiety disorder because our obsessive thought makes us do the compulsive behavior, or else we have a whole ton of anxiety. So for example, if during this time of COVID, if you happen to have obsessive thoughts about health issues, then you're going to compulsively try to prevent getting sick by washing your hands successively, by staying away from people by, wearing maybe a mask more than the average person does. There will be compulsive behaviors that you have in order to try to prevent the obsessive thought from coming true. But the reason I put it in thought disorder is because it really is an obsessive need to be sure, to know for sure that I'm not going to get sick, for example. If your obsession is about your home safety and you check your front door and your back door and all your windows 6 times before you can go to bed, or you make sure that your stove is turned off 6 times before you go to bed, then you have this obsessive need to be sure that I am safe, obsessive need to be sure that the doors are locked, the windows are locked. So it really is a thought disorder more than it is an anxiety disorder, because anxiety medication doesn't help with obsessive compulsive disorder. It really takes something else. There's a part of the brain, it's right up here at the fold of the brain, and it's called the cingulate system. And it is kind of like the gear shifter for our brain. It's where we can shift out of one thought to another. Say you have a position about something and someone gives you a really good argument to the contrary, and you can go, well, there's something about that I can take in. I'm willing to receive that information, so I can change my thinking, maybe not entirely, but I can take it in and let it be a part of my new thought process. Well, that happens in the cingulate system. So if we have a really hard time shifting out of the thought, like you can give me 16 pieces of evidence and I am still not going to change my mind, it's possible that we have an issue in the cingulate system. If you have a hard time shifting out of one activity to another, if you have a really hard time with receiving any kind of perspective from other people, you may have an issue with your cingulate system. But certainly if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, you have a problem with cingulate system. And antidepressants actually help more with obsessive compulsive disorder than any kind of anti-anxiety medication. And then just being willing to start to work on those things that have you in bondage. So I had a teenager a number of years ago who had I think she was up to about 16 rituals that she had to follow in order to get through her day. So she had to do things like turn around 4 times in the shower and say her ABCs before she could wash her hair. I mean, she just had all of these rituals. And if she didn't do these rituals, then she would feel this intense anxiety. And it was a need to just control and manage her life. And so the way she started to work on it was to decide which of these rituals do I want to work on first to try to get rid of. She would work on enduring the anxiety of not doing that thing until she could calmly, take a shower without turning around 4 times or saying her ABCs. And each one she would then check off and would be able to get free of those rituals. And, we can have some of those that are pretty tame. For example, if I'm not thinking about something else, I count stairs. I can tell you the average floor in a house is 14 steps. But if I'm thinking about something else, I don't count stairs. If I don't count stairs, I don't have to go back down to the bottom to go back up and count them. So it's not really an obsessive compulsive disorder kind of thing, but it's just kind of a habit. Or if I eat M&Ms, I like to sort them by color and then kind of eat them in that way. We can have our little quirks as long as they don't impede our ability to function and slow us down in the things that we want to do. I have found that sometimes the more intelligent someone is, the more likely they are to have some obsessive compulsive issues. There is also some new research, and I haven't had a chance to do much study on it, where it's only obsessive disorder. The person is not driven to do compulsive behavior, but they are driven to be obsessively thinking about some issues, like that obsessed in the ability to need to know. For example, sometimes I see someone who maybe is going through a breakup and they are obsessive about, I need to know why. Why did he leave me? Why is he seeing this other woman? I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure we ever can understand why someone does something like that. However, how can you let go of the obsession of needing to know? And so that may be something that some folks are dealing with, and not realizing that it can be better. You don't have to be tied to the obsessive thoughts or the compulsive behavior. I doubt that anyone here is suffering with psychosis. That would be a difficult thing to be pastoring and psychotic, but schizophrenia certainly is what we first think of with psychosis. But we can also have psychosis with extreme depression, extreme mania, and certainly psychosis with some dementia or even a medication reaction. You know, there can be some short-term psychosis. If someone starts to tell you, I just think you're a little off in your thoughts, at least stop and listen. You know, if they think you're being a little paranoid or not rational, or it's just, that doesn't really make any sense. I mean, how can you hear your neighbors talking about you in the house next door when all the windows are closed? Listen, you know, maybe there's something going on that you need to pay attention to. Schizoaffective disorder is a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So the individual is struggling with both a thought disorder and the mood disorder. So it's a kind of a difficult, challenging combination. And then of course, dementia. I mean, I'm certainly on the lookout for dementia. My mother's mother had dementia when she passed. My mother had dementia when she passed, and my father is 94 with some dementia in an assisted living. So I'm figuring my odds are not great, and I'm working on trying to keep my brain healthy in any way that I can. So being aware of your genetic history and seeing where you might be with that. So let me talk about trauma. I want to make sure that this is important to cover. So first of all, if you go through a traumatic event, car accident, tragic death of a spouse, loss of a job, I mean, any, you know, that was really stressful. An acute stress disorder is the diagnosis for the first 6 months. You're expected to be in a bit of shock. You're expected to be emotionally overwhelmed. You are expected to have issues managing your day-to-day activities because you have had an acute stress. Talking about the stress is the number one thing that helps. And we tend as caregivers to not do that. We think I can suck it up and I can deal with it myself and I don't have to talk about it. There's been some interesting research that for those who lived in New York City during 9/11, there was far less PTSD as an aftermath than was expected. And the reason is because people were talking about it. Everybody was talking about it. What was your experience? Where were you? What happened to you? How did you feel? What did you do? And you couldn't help not talking about it. You know, if you lived in New York after 9/11, we often are involved in acute stress that is limited to us. You know, if we're in a car accident, maybe we're the only one in the car, or maybe the other person who's there, you know, had a serious injury or even died. You know, we may be dealing with it very much by ourselves and not talking about it. So make sure if you have had an acute stress that you talk to people about it, you write about it, you journal about it, you write music about it, whatever it is that works for you, that you don't just let it sit there, because if you let it sit there and you don't process through it, it becomes PTSD, which, you know, is post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's where it just really takes up residence in the nervous system. There are 3 places we remember things that have happened to us. We remember them in the upper brain, where we can tell the story about what happened. We remember them in the midbrain, which is the emotional brain, where we can tell you how it feels emotionally, scared, sad, angry, those emotions. And then we remember it in the reptilian brain where we feel the fight, flight, or freeze. And the fight or flight is easier to process through than the freeze. If we've experienced a situation where we felt frozen and immobilized and literally scared to death, it is going to be a bigger impact for us. I heard of a firefighter she's a relative of one of my clients, who drove, her job that particular day was driving the fire truck to the scene of a fatal fire where a child died. Now her cohorts went into the fire, so they had the fight or flight part of them triggered, and they went in to rescue the child. Unfortunately, the child was deceased, but the firefighter behind the wheel felt powerless. She wasn't able to disperse any of that energy in her body in any way, and she felt powerless just sitting behind the wheel of the truck. So she ended up with PTSD because of that event. And she also really didn't have anybody to process through it with her, because they experienced something totally different. I think also she probably figured, well, why is this bothering me? Because I didn't go into the fire. I didn't have that experience, but that was part of the problem. She felt powerless behind the wheel of the fire truck. So sometimes we can have these excessive reactions that we think are ridiculous. I shouldn't be having this reaction. What's wrong with me? We're embarrassed to talk about it. We're supposed to be these strong, godly people who prayer should work. Well, I love God as much as anybody, but prayer doesn't get me through all things. I need to talk to human beings also. I need to get the help that I need to get through it. So PTSD can be big and can be buried. So you may have had an event that happened back in your younger years that comes back years later, and you're shocked that it came back. You're shocked. What's this about? You don't even maybe know that it's connected to something from the past. So sometimes you have what feels like this excessive emotional reaction to a situation today, and you don't know what that's about. I almost guarantee you that it's connected to something in your past. And that if you could sit down with somebody, it doesn't have to be a therapist necessarily. It could be a sibling, for example. You might say, wow, I don't know why going into the hospital to see our mother was so stressful to me. It just really triggered a whole bunch inside of me. And then your sibling might say, well, maybe it was back when grandma died. Maybe they can help you make a connection to something in your past that was very overwhelming for you as a child. I wanted to put borderline personality disorder in here too. I'm pretty confident none of you have borderline personality disorder, or you wouldn't be good at what you do, but you may interface with people with borderline personality disorder. And it is not always considered a trauma disorder, but I know that when they rewrote the DSM recently, they considered putting it under a trauma disorder, because I think that really is where it comes from. It is an excessive back and forth. I love you. I hate you. I love you. I hate you. I need you like crazy. Leave me alone. And you're never quite sure where they stand. You probably have crossed paths with someone in your ministry over the years. You haven't quite figured out why they're hot and cold with you. And it may be because of some trauma in them having borderline personality disorder. You've probably also had interactions with people with attachment disorders. You may have an attachment disorder of your own and not realize it. So healthy attachment is when we can feel safe. We can feel safe with at least a small group of inner circle people, that we're willing to talk about anything with a small group of people, not necessarily all together, but that you have someone, 2, 3, 4 people at least, that you feel confident and safe with, that you can talk about anything with. You can be vulnerable with, you can admit your frailties and your shortcomings with, you can celebrate your victories with. But when we're anxiously attached, we're not quite sure who we can trust. We misread situations. We are always wondering if that person, what that person said, what did that mean? That person's facial expression, did that mean that they don't like me, that they're upset with me? We misread things a lot, and we're just anxious about whether we're good enough, whether someone's going to abandon us, or if they're going to be there consistently. And then avoidant attachment is when fairly early on in childhood, because of certain circumstances around our childhood, we kind of decided the only person I can really trust is me. And so we choose not to let other people in. We choose not to need other people. We need to kind of be our own expert at everything. And an extreme version of avoidant attachment is actually narcissism, which is where, you know, I truly, the only person that matters is me. If I can use you to get what I need, that's what I'll do. And I'm sure that you've probably had some narcissistic injury in your ministry from someone. They chew people up and spit them out, and unfortunately can do a lot of emotional damage in the process. Unfortunately, narcissists are also very, very good at convincing other people that they're good and right, and that whoever they see as their enemy is all bad and all wrong. And I would be shocked if most of you did not have at least some experience with a narcissist at some place in your ministry. They do a lot of damage, and it's okay to ask for help to get healed from that damage. You really do need to ask for help to get healed from that damage. It can take literally months. I had a narcissistic father in my office for literally 10 minutes, and it took me all weekend to heal from the damage that he did in 10 minutes. So they are really good at what they do. They really know how to trigger shame. That's what they're masters at. They're masters at triggering our shame. And all of us have something that can get triggered. So if you've had a run-in with a narcissist, especially an intimate relationship with a narcissist, whether it be a parent, a significant other, best friend, please, please, please seek some help for that. In general, we are all likely to have a genetic predisposition to some mental illness, which will materialize if and when we have an excessive load of stress for our system to handle. I know mine is anxiety. My father's mother worried from the time she woke up to the time she went to bed about her kids and whether they were safe. My dad drove 40 minutes one direction to work. My uncle drove 50 minutes the other direction in a gasoline truck. So she worried about them in the morning. She worried about them coming home every day. She worried all the time. I see anxiety in my father, and I know that it's something that I have to manage. I really have to work on. I have to do good self-care. I have to watch my thoughts. I have to make sure that I'm getting enough sleep. Those things that help me to manage my anxiety. I know things at work. I love to garden. That helps. Taking walks helps me. I know what things help me when I'm starting to feel anxious. And I have to read when I'm starting to get 2 or 3 on that 10-point scale. Okay, what do I need to do to get back down to calm and peace and 0? The other thing I wanted you to know is the length of time a person has struggled with their symptoms is a good indicator of the severity of the condition. So if you have struggled with, let's say, low-level depression for 20 years, it's going to be tough to combat. It's going to be tough to get rid of. If you can catch it early, let's say maybe you lost somebody, maybe you lost a parent a year ago, you kind of got stuck in the grief, now it's depression. Don't wait. Get the help that you need now, because if you let it go 20 years, it's going to be tougher to get rid of. It's going to be tougher to treat. And medication, I mentioned also already, medication alone is rarely a long-term help. It can help with the symptoms, but it rarely helps with the cause. And very often the cause has some trauma based to it, or some unresolved grief. I think probably the first time I realized the unresolved grief when I first started practicing in therapy. I had a woman and she came in severely depressed, said she'd been severely depressed for like 20 years. I happened to ask her what happened 20 years ago, and she teared up immediately. Her mom had died. And I said, did you ever grieve your mom? No, I was raising kids and I had to take care of them. And my husband had some stuff going on and I had to take care of him. And then it got to a point where I thought, well, gosh, I should be over it by now. Time alone does not cause us to, it does not help us with grief. Time by itself does not resolve grief. Time, feeling, and grieving helps, but you got to do the work of grieving, which is feel the sadness, bawl your eyes out when you need to, feel the anger, do whatever you need to do, bat a tennis ball around tennis court, whatever you need to do to get that anger out. We got to feel it in order to process through it. Another piece that's super important as pastors is when I first started to do therapy, my mother had been a Stephen minister, and I don't know how many of you know that program, but there's a book called The Christian Caregiver, and she was never known to read these kind of books or to give me books, but this particular one, she said, you need to read this. So, and it was really powerful. It really helped me a lot because I was concerned as a first-time therapist. I was starting the practice. It was virtually a private practice, even though it was a nonprofit connected to our church. How am I not going to mess people up? Am I going to be able to do the right thing? And the book talked about God is the cure giver. We are only caregivers. And that helped me so much to realize I can't cure anybody. I don't have the capability of curing anybody. I can help people figure out what the cure is for them. And certainly for those who in my office who are willing, a big part of that is God. It's not the only answer, though. God also provides other resources through medication, through, working through past trauma and past issues. Another really important piece is drawing healthy boundaries. It's hugely important for your own mental health and for effective intervention with any congregate you might have. I am absolutely rigid about my work hours. I do not add an hour here, an hour there. No matter how much someone needs something. I mean, in 20 years, I have probably bent that rule less than 10 times. Because if I don't take care of my own mental health, I am no good to anybody. So, and I know it's really tough for pastors because, you get a call in the middle of the night, someone is at the ER, you get a call that says, hey, someone's going into surgery. You get a call that someone just passed and you need to drop everything and you need to go. But make sure you're taking time off. Make sure you're getting sabbaticals. Make sure you're, giving someone else the baton, whether it's your elder chair, whatever it is, however your church is organized, make sure that you are not the only person that responds to the needs of your congregation, or you will absolutely burn out. And the very best thing we can do for our congregants is to live it, to live healthy lifestyle so they can see what a healthy lifestyle looks like. And I love the quote, if you believe it but don't live it, you don't really believe it. So, whatever you're preaching to your congregants, please live it so they can see, a living, breathing example of how to live in a healthy lifestyle. And you must have your own confidential support system. I've seen way too many pastors who, certainly your best friend probably shouldn't be within your congregation, because when you're frustrated with your congregation, that's probably not the person you should be talking to. But you got to have somebody that you can talk to, somebody that you can share, some of the most intimate details of what's going on in your congregation, even if you don't give names, but you can pray together and they can be your support system and they can be your help. If you're doing this by yourself, again, you will burn out. It's just a matter of time. So that is what I wanted to share with you. What can I answer? What kind of questions might you have or concerns that you might have that I didn't answer?
Brenda, let me tell you, I listened to you and I've gone through my catalog of church meetings of 36 years. And so many of those meetings needed a counselor at the table
Yes.
because of behaviors you talked about today. Many of them I've seen at church meetings and among clergy and laity. And so anyway, my memory system is alert right now, remembering all those meetings. But I do want to invite my colleague, Dr. McIntosh, to ask the first question. And then others, you'll be invited to give questions as you wish after the first question by Dr. McIntosh.
All right, thank you. If you could unshare your screen so we can see everybody.
Yes, great.
Explain some more about the genetic disposition.
Sure.
I don't think some of us may realize that mental illness may be a family
Oh, yes.
or genetic thing, and how we can look for signs that it's either happening with family members or happening with us, that it's not just the blues or I'm just not tired, that it may be something else without self-diagnosing.
Sure. It is really helpful to just kind of look at your family, sit back and look at your family. Was there crazy Uncle Jerry? Was there, drunk Aunt Sally? At most of if there's a substance abuse issue somewhere, it probably was a self-medication for some kind of a mental illness. If there was a suicide, well, you can pretty much know there was at least depression, if not bipolar disorder. It puts people a lot at risk of suicide. I think we don't realize that what we grow up with felt normal. And if we don't step back a minute and go, is this normal? Is this what I saw from my peers growing up? Is this what I saw in my neighborhood growing up? Or was something different? If your mom could never leave the house, but every other mom was, driving their kids to school and going to their kids' functions, and your mom could never leave the house. Well, there was a reason she could never leave the house. Was she so anxious she couldn't leave the house? Or was she so depressed she couldn't leave the house? As you really kind of just look back over what was my experience, what did I see in the extended family? Was there someone that my parents would never let me see growing up? And maybe there was a reason why they would never let me be with grandpa. So, trying to look at those things objectively with fresh eyes begin to make you go, oh, maybe there was something, maybe there was some mental illness here. Maybe I do need to be aware of that genetic possibility that has gotten passed on to me.
How about other questions? Anyone else? Just speak out your question.
I have one more. How can we be aware, especially in our seasoned relatives, that what they may be experiencing may be some form of mental illness and not just old age? Because I've seen, like in my own family, that relatives were possibly dealing with dementia issues, but people just brushed it off and assumed, well, they're just getting old.
Sure. So you're wanting to know what signs to look for with dementia? Dementia, while I've experienced it, is still not my expertise because I don't treat dementia, but it starts with a slipping of memory usually, and that is not necessarily a given. I've done some reading about dementia. We could be 95, 100 years old and still have decent memory. I mean, that is not necessarily just a slippage, but I mean, a natural process. But then like some confusion, what I see in my father is he gets confused. He's been in assisted living for 4 years. He thinks he gets moved around from apartment to apartment. He's been in the same apartment all 4 years. He, doesn't remember how long my mom's been gone. He always asks me, what is age is, his birth date, multiple times in the same visit. So when it becomes more, and then the self-care issues, he doesn't do as well self-care as he used to. Can't keep track of his razor. He's paranoid that someone's going to steal his shaver, so he hides it. Then we have to find it. So, as it gets more severe, it gets more obvious. I don't know if I answered your question or not. Okay.
See, Bob has his hand up.
I have a question which is completely academic and not related to the pastoral care focus of this meeting. I've never heard of more than one type of bipolar disorder until this presentation. Is that a recent development, or
No.
have I not been aware? We had somebody in my Quaker meeting 25 years ago with bipolar disorder that I'd never had any involvement with. And I learned that back then. I've not done any more research.
Yeah, no, as long as I've been doing therapy, it's been bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. The bipolar 2 is just more easily missed. I think most of the people that we know with bipolar probably have bipolar 1 because it's way more obvious. It is the mania is, I would call it bizarre. They are acting bizarrely, but excessively bizarrely happy or agitated, and so it's much more obvious. They're making really bad decisions on a regular basis. So that's usually the distinction. I mean, that's usually what we see. So bipolar 2 folks kind of slip under the radar a lot.
How about another question, anyone?
Emily has one that she put in the chat. What would you like to say about self-disclosing mental health issues as a pastor?
That is a great question.
Absolutely.
It depends on the safety of your congregation, I would say. If you are in a safe congregation, I think that self-disclosing could be not only therapeutic for yourself, but also an amazing way to connect with your congregation, because they see you as not someone above them, but someone on an equal playing field, just with a different role. I will share with you that I had a really, really anxiety producing situation a couple of weeks ago. I was on vacation with my family, our daughters and son-in-laws and grandkids and my husband, and I get a email from my coworker back home here that my licensing board is subpoenaing my records from a previous client. Now, if that didn't scare the tar out of me and raise my anxiety, I don't know what did, but it turned out ultimately that she probably has had a psychotic break, and she was accusing me of not reporting some abuse that she thought that she had told me. But just in the way she made the complaint, it was kind of obvious that something was going on, and it didn't make a lot of sense. But it was extremely anxiety producing for me. And I happened to fill in for our senior pastor yesterday, and I debated, should I share this or should I not share this? It's a pretty vulnerable thing to share. And I decided to share the experience and talk about how it actually, the message was about redemption, about God's redemption, and how I felt redeemed at the end, as my licensing investigator said, I don't see anything to substantiate this claim. So, I will pass that on to the board. But I debated, but my congregation is safe. I feel very safe in my congregation. I feel that no one would use that against me. And so I did choose to self-disclose that.
How about one more question, anyone? In the chat, let's see.
I want to address the overall stigma. One thing that still stays with me after all these years was a vice presidential candidate who was forced to withdraw because it had been discovered that several years, and it was not even a recent thing, but somewhere in his past, he had sought mental health care.
Yeah.
And the other party turned it against him, and the presidential candidate had to make him step down. And the big question of the day, do you really want to trust the buttons with somebody who sought mental health care? I'm like, yes.
Yeah, much better than someone who needed it and didn't, right?
Get it right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as a culture,
Mhm.
because most of our congregants are in the world at large. And so how within the church do we address mental health
Mhm.
and not make it a sin, a crime, or a shame?
May I add to that before you answer, Brenda?
Mhm.
Yes,
Because
yes.
sometimes congregations tolerate behavior from people at public meetings, church meetings, that behaviors that are known to be problematic. And so I want to add that to the question, because sometimes we accept that behavior at church settings and don't put people in any type of accountability system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big thing is we talk about it. We talk about it. We make sure that we do have Mental Health Sunday. One of the things that we have, of course, our congregation, our church has sponsored the Counseling Center for 20 years. So they're not surprised that we offer mental health services. And there are three therapists in the congregation. So they get to hear about it quite a bit. And it's not unusual for me to maybe mention, I will, in a message that I'll say in my practice, or when I'm talking with people, I notice people with this struggle or that struggle. And so I talk about it a lot. And we have folks in our congregation who are clients. So we have done a lot to try to educate, to try to make it open and communicate about it. I think we just can't keep it in the dark. That's the big thing. We just can't keep it in the dark. We just got to keep talking about it. It is an issue. And probably all of us, the vast majority of us, will have a clinical period of depression in our lifetime. And I think every single one of us experiences some level of anxiety, even if it's very transient. We know what that feels like in our body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. What a rich hour this has been. There's time for one more question, believe it or not, one more. And then I want to ask Brenda if you give our closing prayer after we finish the questions. One more
Great.
question.
Ms. Malone has raised her hand.
Oh, great.
Good afternoon again. I just want to fully disclose that I do not serve in pastoral or clergy leadership. Rather, I am the director of faith and community engagement here at Adam Mate. So I'm not really sure how I got this invitation, but I will say that I'm absolutely pleased, as it is an awesome segue and support for the work that I'm now building here. Just in April, I launched a series, Health, Healing, and Hope, which is a part of the Adam H. new branding. And it's helped those 4 H's bridging our temples, because we are in a position now that we can really talk to the faith community about it being okay, not to be okay. One thing I said, COVID and the pandemic happened to some people, and it happened for some folks. And I think it happened for faith leaders and faith professionals to be vulnerable and transparent. But this work that we're building is a collaboration amongst all leaders here in Columbus and Franklin County to be a help and support to one another. When I launched this series, I was very clear that what we want to do is just not help faith leaders to help others. We want to support faith leaders to be happy and whole and free to get services and help and connection, for themselves, their families. So this has been great. Just kind of like maybe a confirmation that I'm doing the right thing and that I'm on the right track as we shift what Adam H is doing in connection with faith. So I hope I don't get kicked off the series because I don't serve as clergy. I was raised by a very strong deacon. My dad and my mom was active in our church, but most of my family, honestly, on my mother's side, are pastors. So I've been around it. I worked and served at First Church of God for 12 years on the paid leadership staff. So this work is not new to me. So thank you so much for allowing me to stay. I hope that there is a place for me to learn and set among you, and then perhaps some partnership and collaboration with Adam H. Through your subject matter expertise. And just willing to partner with us and grow together. The series is going to run through December, and I am happy to send the information to somebody who can share this forward in preparation for a mental health conference in spring of 2023. So thank you for allowing me to sit at the feet of our elders, and very grateful for this presentation. Again, that just really confirms the season that I am in my life and in the downside of my professional journey.
So glad that you were here and that you stayed, because you're not the only non-clergy person in this forum today. And clergy and laity are invited to every forum that we offer. And so your presence here has been good for us as well as for you. So thank you for staying with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Did you sign up recently on our website to be added to our mailing list?
I don't think so. I don't, okay. You know what? I may have. Let me just say this because,
all right.
I'll say this. I am thirsty in learning and partnering in the faith community across all demographics, across all denominations.
Yes.
And so it may have been, or maybe, and now I do know some colleagues have dropped my information because they know, just not, I don't want to hold up this meeting, but this division of Adam H is new. And I've only been here a year. So somebody might have just tried to help me out.
All right.
Dr. McIntosh, I do believe we have something in common. That blue and white family, and then I'm just gonna mute.
All right.
Oh my.
All
right. Well, Dr. McIntosh, how about some announcements before we ask Brenda to give our closing prayer?
Okay. Every fourth Monday, we have a similar conversation, but we call it just our faith leaders Zoom call. With our children going back to school, we're going to be dealing with honesty in education. I'll bring some of my colleagues who do honesty in education work, advocacy work to the table. Names will be announced later, but I'm going to call on a couple of them to come and give us an update on the fourth Monday on where we are, especially as the legislature is getting ready to go back into session with a lot of those bills before us, House Bills 322, 327, 354, and 616. We are advocating with them to have these bills not passed because they are harmful to our children.
Amen.
And especially certain segments of our children who are most vulnerable. And so our faith teaches us that Jesus says, suffer the little children and, don't forbid them to come to me. Mm-hmm. And so we're just going to be bringing that conversation. Deborah Peterman informs me that she will be our mental health speaker for October. No.
Yes. I don't think it's the mental health one. Dr. Jack, what is it?
Right. Disabilities.
Sorry about that.
Yes. Churches and people with disabilities.
Okay, but it's still going to be the second Monday, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. October. Yes. All right. Yeah, it's still part of our stigma reduction series. All right.
Yes, thank you.
So glad we were on today. Reverend Brenda, Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And your expertise.
Thank you.
Your expertise has been spot on with us. Thank you. And please give us our closing prayer.
Absolutely. Will you pray with me? Lord God, we come to you as your humble servants, and we seek your help in being able to keep ourselves healthy, being able to keep ourselves in a place where we truly can do good self-care so that we can not only serve others in the way that you would call us to serve, but also to be able to show people how to walk in that healthy balance between self-care and other care. And just pray that you'll bring to our awareness anything that we need to work on as individuals so that we can be the most equipped to help in the way that you've called us to help and to serve, and that we might wisely guide and lead others in the right direction as well. In the name of your son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Man,
Thank you.
thank
Goodbye,
you